When it comes to thinking about the world and all its horrendous problems, my brain and I get almost immediately and extremely overwhelmed. I can't compartmentalise to save my life. So I've worked hard to streamline my thoughts for this video, and this is where I'm at. There are so many vile and heartbreaking things happening in the world right now. I'm overwhelmed. I feel powerless. I'm often caught in a cycle of feeling anxious, furious, guilty, despondent, and I know I'm not the only one. I want to do something, but what? I'm not the person to make a video about the history of genocide in Palestine or breaking news about atrocities committed by ICE. There are people who know infinitely more than I do about those things and whose takes on these topics should be amplified and listened to, and I'll link some of them below. So I come back to, what can I do? I love books. This is a book channel. I'm at my most passionate and perhaps my most useful when I talk about books, and I feel like maybe people could do with some reassurance at the minute. I know I do, and one major way I get reassurance is from books. So, in the face of all those vile and heartbreaking things, we, that's myself and Matty, producer, director and editor for Books and Cats, want to promote some reassuring books in the hope that you might benefit from them like I did. And by the way, there's a very big asterisk after the word reassuring in this video, and I'll explain why in a minute, just bear with me. Matty and I want to do this not because we want you to be ignorant of the roster of atrocities currently being committed on a global scale, but because it's often hard to focus on anything other than that roster. That's how social media, the news, and capitalism like it. It's no secret that they want you raging, divided, despondent, and seeking comfort in the arms of your favourite brands. And hey, raging is sometimes where we're at. But I want to use this video to make space for something else. I usually ask a question right about now, at the end of an introduction, and honestly, summing up these very big feelings into one question is difficult, but if there is a question to ask here, let it be this. How do I keep reading when the world is on fire? And to begin answering that question, and before I give you my 3 book recommendations, I'm going to be looking at this, which is another book, so maybe I'm actually recommending 4 books, How to Stay Sane in an Age of Division by Elif Shafak. But before we jump into that existential hotbed, welcome. I'm Dr. Rosie Whitcomb, this is Mousy the Magical, and we make analytical book-based video essays, so please subscribe if that's your jam. A very big thank you to our patrons over on Patreon and channel members right here on YouTube. We are, as ever, so grateful for your support, and if you'd like to join them, click the link in the description. I also want to let you know that Matty, Mouse and I have chosen 3 charities, Heal Palestine, Gendered Intelligence, and the Refugee and Immigrant Centre for Education and Legal Services, and we'll be donating whatever ad revenue this video makes within the first month equally between them. We've linked them all below, so if you are able and willing to donate, please do. Also, be aware going forward that this video contains discussions of suicide, police brutality, illness, death and loss, domestic and child abuse, racism and environmental destruction, so please keep that in mind. Close to the end of her book, after exploring how horrendous global events cause us to feel disillusionment, bewilderment, anxiety, anger and apathy, Shafak asks a question that dogs me almost constantly. How do we simultaneously remain engaged and manage to remain sane? And not only sane, but calm, mentally well, even joyful, dare I say. How do we do this? Because it's so easy to face the horror, feel completely overwhelmed and retreat into a state of despondency and or protective apathy, which I get, but then nothing changes and everyone's still suffering. So please, God, help us, Elif Shafak. What is the answer? Unsurprisingly, she offers us no simple solution. And this is part of the point she makes. Do not be afraid of complexity, she writes. Be afraid of people who promise an easy shortcut to simplicity. The business of being alive and coexisting with other living things is and always will be extremely complex. So abandon the hope that there is a single solution, a single way to live, or a single story to tell. There are so many stories out there. And as Shafak writes in her introduction, stories bring us together. Untold stories keep us apart. Now, you might be left thinking, well, okay, that's a nice sentiment, but what do we do with advice like this? How do we translate it into practical terms? This is all very philosophical. It might make sense, maybe, it might work in theory, but how do we action it? And hey, more bad news, because I'm not in a position to answer that for you. I'm barely equipped to answer that for myself. But when I feel so extremely overwhelmed, I try to boil things down as best I can. Job one is to do whatever I can to calm down, because I'm not going to be able to think my way out of these kinds of questions. I'm not going to be able to solve them and find the answer. If I can manage to calm down, which often takes the form of going for a walk or hurtling myself into an activity of some kind, I'll do my best to take those conflicting extremes and find a way to middle ground them. When it comes to the, for me, ever-present conflict between comfort zone and necessary exposure and vulnerability, I imagine the tide coming in and going out. It's a constant push-pull, and it doesn't stop. So, can I find some way to simultaneously accept it, let it flow, and also keep myself afloat? This applies to life in general, and for me it applies to reading in particular. To be able to mediate between desperately wanting to read something comforting and familiar and being compelled to read outside my comforting echo chamber, I think of the tide, retreating and cresting. Point being that it's very okay, and I think very important, to have that comfort zone, to rest in, to find community in maybe, but it's also important to move outside it as and when I can. Because, as Shafak writes, mass destruction doesn't start with concentration camps or gas chambers. It doesn't start with putting marks on neighbours' doors just because they are different, or imposing laws for minorities to carry particular signs or wear certain clothes. Discrimination always starts with words. It starts with language. Exposing ourselves to the range and power of language, understanding something of how it can be used, what impact it has, and how it can sow the seeds of change is a very valuable undertaking. And so is looking after yourself and ensuring you're not constantly out on that ledge or riding on the top of that wave, overexposed and overwhelmed. Allow for the ebb and flow. Read with the tides. And also, don't shame yourself if all you want to do in this moment is comfort read until the cows come home. That might just be where you're at. As and when you can, though, keep expanding your reading. And by the way, that doesn't mean force yourself to read something horrifying that will send you spiralling. Reading outside your comfort zone and remaining engaged can take many forms and will, of course, be very individual. Taking time to work out what that looks like for you is important. But if it helps, this is what it looks like for me. And here is that asterisk, the very important thing to keep in mind when I take you through my 3 recommendations of reassuring reading. Reassuring, in this video, does not mean easy. It does not mean comforting, and it does not mean free from difficult subject matter. The 3 books I have chosen are not your classic beach reads. Comfort reading is, for me, a way of turning my brain off a bit and relaxing, which is great, but if I do it too much, it's more numbing than it is reassuring. The books I'm about to share with you are, by contrast, inspiring, challenging, hopeful, and powerful. For me, they are reassuring because they rally me and make me want to do some good. And, without further ado, here they are. Into the woods we go. I have been agonising over how to talk to you about this novel, The Overstory, by Richard Powers, for a good long while now. When I first started writing this script, I knew I wanted to include it because when I first read it about 5 or 6 years ago, it was one of the most impressive, resonant and provocative things I had ever read. I reread it for the purposes of this video, and it still is all of those things, but it's also very, very difficult to put into words, to describe to you what actually happens in this novel. If I were to give you a very, very pared back blurb, it would be something like, The Overstory is about trees and why they're important. But it's so much more than that. It's a deep meditation on what it means to be human, what it is to be an activist, what we owe to each other and the world we share. It's a bogglingly intricate mesh of relationships, a heartfelt depiction of human grief and loss, but it goes beyond the human too. It's a tribute to the lives and deaths of trees and ecosystems that we often overlook. Michael Pollan says it decenters the human as the source of all meaning and value, and I think that gives it a uniquely humbling effect. Now, this doesn't mean that The Overstory shames humans per se. It's not out here saying, humans bad, trees good. If you're not chaining yourself to trees, you're an evil person. This is a book that values human life, and it values plant life. It makes a stunning case for the value of nature's unobserved networks. And in my experience of reading it at least, it equalises us humans, resituates us as part of the world's ecosystems, rather than superior to them. But how does the novel actually take shape? Well, this is another reason it's difficult to describe the thing, because the overstory follows the separate stories of several different people. You've got Nicholas Hole, inheritor of a family farm and the last chestnut tree to survive a devastating and widespread blight. Mimi Ma, whose father takes his own life and leaves her and her sisters a series of jade rings. Dorothy Kazali and Ray Brinkman, thespians with a fractious marriage. Nile Mehta, paraplegic creator of a wildly successful tree-inspired world-building game. Olivia Vandegrift, a college student who gets electrocuted and is then able to commune with seemingly unearthly beings. Douglas Pavlicek, veteran cum eco-warrior. Adam Apic, academic studying human idealism. And Philippa Westerford, scientist who discovers the incredible networks and relationships trees have with one another. Oh, that was agonising to write, because these characters do and are so much more than a few sentences can possibly convey. But hopefully that gives you a flavour of the diverse cast of characters we're dealing with here. Now, one of the most interesting things about this book is that these characters, for the most part, follow what appear to be separate storylines. At the start of the book, they don't know each other, but by the end, almost all of their stories intersect. Sometimes this intersection is direct. Nicholas, for instance, forms a deep bond with Olivia after they spend a year camped out in a giant tree that they're trying to save. Mimi and Douglas, too, end up meeting and engaging in frontline activism together. But some of the ways these characters connect is more subtle. Patricia, for example, writes a book, The Secret Lives of Trees, which, at different points in the narrative, at different points in time, and I should say that this book spans decades, the other characters encounter. Like a forest's sprawling system of branches and roots, these characters become connected. Connections in the overstory are drawn with such nuance and sensitivity. Sometimes they're loud and desperate and direct, and at other times they thrum quietly through the earth. What I think Powers does here with such brilliance is remind us that if we're alive and we share the earth with other living things, then we're part of an ecosystem. We're part of a network. And I think he does this really brilliantly through his characters, right? So they're all individuals. They all have different lives, they live in different places, they have different beliefs and ideals and priorities, but they're not individualistic. They all also go through significant and unavoidable change, and it's through this change that they each learn to be part of something bigger than themselves. There are two particularly memorable refrains that carry through the book that have to do with change. A thing can travel everywhere just by holding still is the first. This is a gentle yet powerful advocacy for consciously slowing down productivity. What, the book asks, can happen when we slow down to the speed of trees and observe? What happens if we step back from the idea that we have to constantly produce in order to be valuable? There's a razor-sharp awareness here of the variety of perspectives of all living things. The other refrain is from Ovid. Let me sing to you now about how people turn into other things. Things turning into other things. It almost feels too easy, too simple an idea, but it's really not when you think about it. In this book, you've got trees turning into timber, people turning into trees, people turning into different people they never thought they could be, giant rotting trunks turning into food for the entire forest, individuals changing into part of a collective. So change and connection are central to the book. At the very heartwood of it all is the idea that every living thing is part of an ecosystem, and ecosystems are always changing, always evolving. Over and over again, human exceptionalism is challenged in the overstory as the characters realise just how connected to and reliant on the arboreal world they really are. Patricia's book, The Secret Lives of Trees, even begins by stating that you and the tree in your backyard come from a common ancestor. 1.5 billion years ago, the two of you parted ways. But even now, after an immense journey in separate directions, that tree and you still share 1/4 of your genes. Patricia's storyline is one of my favourites. To put it far, far too briefly, we see her going from disgraced academic whose research into trees is ridiculed and disparaged and eventually forgotten about, and then she ends up living in a cabin in the woods away from society, and she's on the cusp of taking her own life by eating a meal made with very poisonous mushrooms, but she stops herself. She ends up connecting with a group of researchers years later, all of whom love her book, and more research has since corroborated her findings. Patricia's vindication is wonderful, and the good that she goes on to do in the book is heartening. But I want to focus on a passage before things begin to turn around for Patricia that really shows up this idea of ecosystem and connectivity. Clicks and chatter disturb the cathedral hush. The air is so twilight green she feels like she's underwater. It rains particles, spore clouds, broken webs and mammal dander, skeletonized mites, bits of insect frass and bird feather. Everything climbs over everything else, fighting for scraps of light. If she holds still too long, vines will overrun her. She walks in silence, crunching 10,000 invertebrates with every step, watching for tracks in a place where at least one of the native languages uses the same word for footprint and understanding. The earth gives beneath her like a shot mattress. An exposed ridge takes her down into a basin. She swings her singing stick before her, and the temperature plummets as she passes through a thermal curtain. The canopy is a colander stippling the beetle-swarmed surfaces with specks of sun. For every large trunk, a few hundred seedlings huddle in the litter. Sword fern, liverworts, lichen, and leaves as small as sand grains stain every inch of the dank, downed logs. The mosses are themselves as dense as thumbnail forests. She presses on fissures of bark and her fingers sink in knuckle deep. A bit of bushwhacking reveals the extent of the prodigious rot. Crumbling, creature-riddled bones decaying for centuries. Snags gothic and twisted, silvery as inverted icicles. She has never inhaled such fecund putrefaction. The sheer mass of ever-dying life packed into each single cubic foot, woven together with fungal filaments and dew-betrayed spiderweb, leaves her woozy. Mushrooms ladder up the sides of trunks in terraced ledges. Dead salmon feed the trees. Soaked by fog all winter long, spongy green stuff she can't name covers every wooden pillar in thick bays reaching higher than her head. Death is everywhere, oppressive and beautiful. She sees the source of that forestry doctrine she so resisted in school. Looking at all this glorious decay, a person might be forgiven for thinking that old meant decadent, that such thick mats of decomposition were cellulose cemeteries in need of the rejuvenating axe. She sees why her kind will always dread these close, choked thickets where the beauty of solo trees gives way to something massed, scary and crazed. When the fable turns dark, when the slasher film builds to primal horror, this is where the doomed children and wayward adolescents must wander. There are things in here worse than wolves and witches, primal fears that no amount of civilizing will ever tame. The prodigious forest pulls her along, past the trunk of an immense western red cedar. Her hand strokes the fibrous strips that peel from a fluted... Owl! I'm going to have to go from the top of this paragraph because I can't remember. Right. The prodigious forest pulls her along, past the trunk of an immense western red cedar. Her hand strokes the fibrous strips that peel from a fluted trunk whose girth rivals the height of an eastern dogwood. It reeks of incense. The top is sheared off, replaced by a candelabra of boughs promoted to stand-in trunks. A grotto opens at ground level in the rotted heartwood. Whole families of mammals could live inside it. But the branches, 1,000 years on, drooping with scaly sprays a dozen stories above her, are still crammed full of cones. She addresses the cedar, using words of the forest's first humans. Long life maker, I'm here, down here. She feels foolish, at first, but each word is a little easier than the next. Thank you for the baskets and the boxes. Thank you for the capes and hats and skirts. Thank you for the cradles, the beds, the diapers, canoes, paddles, harpoons and nets, poles, logs, posts, the rot-proof shakes and shingles, the kindling that will always light. Each new item is release and relief. Finding no good reason to quit now, she lets the gratitude spill out. Thank you for the tools, the chests, the decking, The clothes closets, the panelling. I forget. Thank you, she says, following the ancient formula, for all these gifts that you have given. And still not knowing how to stop, she adds, we're sorry. We didn't know how hard it is for you to grow back. Not only is Patricia innately curious and knowledgeable about trees, plants, flowers, and fungi, to the extent that she knows exactly which variety of mushroom and in what quantity she needs to end her life, but as she wanders deeper and deeper into the woodland, something different happens. She starts to appreciate this space in a new way. It's like she becomes one with the trees. This passage is absolutely gorgeous, and you know that I love me some rich, unusual imagery, especially when it's got that gothic tinge, that decadence where everything is overripe and rotting. I'm just obsessed, and this passage is worth drinking in, it's worth savouring. It does so much, as well as demonstrating for us the inner workings of a system where death feeds life, where rot feeds growth. Patricia's experience is steeped in myth and folklore and magic. The very human fear of the forest, of the dark, of the unexplored is so beautifully evoked. What I love most about it is the wonderful melding of modern science and the old ways. Patricia, throughout the book, is very logical, very matter-of-fact, but the fact of the matter is a deep, innate understanding of the natural world. She communes with the trees, thanks them, sees them as something more than something there to serve her. In another time, she would have been called a witch of the woods. In this passage, Patricia experiences a new and profound kind of connection and appreciation, and this leads to a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. And she is, by no means, the only character to experience this kind of transformation. Take Nile Meta, for instance, who, as a young boy and alongside his loving father, learned how to code and, as an adult, ended up communing with trees in a way that inspired him to create a best-selling, world-building game beloved by millions of players. Now, on the surface of things, this might seem a far cry from Patricia's woodland wanderings. A video game? Technological progress? The antithesis of conserving woodland and attuning to the old ways and the land, blah, 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 but no! Nile's story is just as much about connection, change, cyclicality, and caring for the world as anyone else's is in this book. And here's an example of that. So there's a chapter fairly late on in the novel where Nile is showing his dad, who is now elderly and on his deathbed, the newest iteration of his game. It's just the two of them, exploring together before any other players are allowed to enter. They meet on a hillside at evening, overlooking the sea. Father and son. It has been some time. After this hour together in a brand new place, it will be so much longer. Nilegi, is that you? Pita, here we are. It works. The old beggar walks up to the blue-skinned god and waves. The god stands still. Sound is very bad, Nile. I can hear you, Dad. Not to worry. It's just you and me. I can't believe it. So amazing. This is nothing. Just wait. The blue god stumbles as he tries to walk. Look at your costume. Look at me. Hoping to make you laugh, Pita. Side by side with shaky steps, they make their way along the ocean-battered cliffs. Since long before the father left for that clinic in distant Minnesota, such a walk together has been impossible. Not since the boys' early childhood have they gone out like this, chattering side by side, their words rushing to keep up with their steps. Nile and his father spend time exploring the world and spend time with each other until it's time to log off. Nile says to his father, "Yes, Dad, I'll see you soon." It's a harmless enough lie. In this world, the beggar has just walked across half a continent, but in the other, he's too frail and wasted to risk an airplane. And the blue god, who has just crossed a jagged mountain range in bare feet. In the world above, his body is so riddled with rogue programs and syntax errors, he won't make it to this world's opening day. His puppet body nods and his palms join together. Thank you for this walk, dear Nile. We'll be home soon. Among many other things, this is such a touching example of how digital spaces can foster essential and empowering connections. Nile is paraplegic, his dad is bedbound, and yet here they are, travelling together, living together in ways they never could in the real world. Again, we have people turning into other things here, living in ways they never imagined possible. Inspired by the networks of the natural world, and eventually by Patricia's book, The Secret Lives of Trees, Nile develops a virtual means of connection and, like the other characters, learns to care deeply about the world and to question how best he can be part of something bigger than himself. And that incredibly potent and prevalent idea leads me to one of my favourite quotes from the entire novel. "You're not just you." As I read it, this phrase has three meanings. You're not just you, as in, you're not alone. You don't have to go through life alone. You're not just you, as in, you're not the only thing in the world that matters. And finally, you're not just you, as in, you are constantly changing into other things, as part of the network of living things on this planet. So, what do you do with the fact that you're not just you? All the way through the novel, characters are made to confront what it is the trees and the world needs them to do. The answers are various, but they tend towards a similar point. Now, this book is anything but trite, but there is a sense at its core that doing what you can, listening to the stories of others, and being of service leads to better things. Not as a golden rule, and not necessarily in the immediacy. Bad things happen to this cast of characters, even when they are doing the right thing and making big personal sacrifices, but over time. There's a feeling in this book that there is good in the world, and many ways to be good for the world. And for me, that's incredibly motivating and reassuring. Now, I do want to stress that this book in many ways isn't an easy read. As I've already explained, the overstory, like the other books I'll be discussing, is not a comforting beach read. There are a fair few gruesome scenes, most notably those involving police brutality against peaceful protesters. But if you can manage that, I do think it is, at its core, an uplifting novel. There are so many reasons for this, so many more than I could reasonably go into in a normal video of ours. I could go on and on. But for now, it's time to leave the woods and cross the English Channel to meet our second book on the roster. Now, devastatingly, we're not literally hopping across the channel to film on location for this section. That would have been incredibly cool, but you're going to have to make do with my bedroom as I wax lyrical not only about a book, but a bookshop. One I imagine that you, as an ardent bibliophile, have heard of before. Nestled in the heart of Paris, just a stone's throw from Notre Dame Cathedral, stands Shakespeare & Company, one of, if not the most famous bookshops in the world. People pilgrimage from all over to browse its ample collection, to sit and read in one of its cosy alcoves or nooks. But why? What's all the fuss about? Well, this bookshop has a long and fascinating history, and one you can read about in this. Shakespeare & Company, A History of the Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart, tells the story of a very magical bookshop. A bookshop that has the almost unearthly ability to make all who enter feel strangely, uniquely at home. When I first visited around 2006, I remember it felt like a kind of homecoming. Now yes, I was an over-the-top, hormonal and romantically rose-tinted teenager, but I was not, and I am not, by any means the only person who felt that way. I remember that pasted all over the walls were the handwritten testimonies of countless visitors, all of whom shared my sentiment. And we were all just random people who probably spent a few hours browsing books and reading. There were, and are, countless more people who actually lived here, for whom the shop really was, literally, a home. Shakespeare & Company was first opened 106 years ago by Sylvia Beach, the soulful and fearless proprietor who would become a central figure in queer, feminist, modernist literary culture, and who created, for countless artists and writers, a progressive, bohemian, bookish haven. Her bookstore, packed with fresh journals, good sunlight, and plump armchairs, was a sanctuary for the era's best writers. Beach herself was the first person to publish James Joyce's modernist epic, Ulysses, in 1922, a brave and mammoth undertaking, especially for someone who lacked experience as a publisher. For this, and for many other reasons, under Beach, Shakespeare & Company became a literary landmark. The likes of W.B. Yeats, F. Scott Fitzgerald, H.D., Ezra Pound, Gertrude Stein, Joyce and Hemingway were among Shakespeare and Company's frequent patrons. But the shop's established progressivism also made it a target. The Nazis occupied France in 1940, and in 1941, Shakespeare and Company was forcibly closed and Beach sent to an internment camp for 6 months. She was eventually released, but she never reopened her shop. However, this was not the end of the road for Shakespeare and Company. A decade later, in 1951, a man named George Whitman opened a bookshop at 37 Rue de la Boucherie called Le Mistral, a bookshop that would become the spiritual successor to Beach's Shakespeare and Company, eventually taking the same name, and this is the same shop on the same plot that we know and love today. And when I say love, I mean it. This is a place that seems to transfix and transform people. A place that people feel very precious over and devoted to. This book tells the story of those people. Now, of course, it tells the stories of Beach and Whitman too, but a biography of Shakespeare and Company wouldn't be complete without the testimonies of the many souls, affectionately referred to by George as tumbleweeds, who spent time living in the shop. In the 1950s, the Latin Quarter was still populated by students who lived in small, dingy, no-star hotels alongside the Quartier's working-class residents. They were joined by American GIs and the New Bohemians, writers, artists, homosexuals, musicians, drug users, who were flooding into Paris to take advantage of the weak franc and the culture's relative permissiveness. Continuing in the tradition established by Beach, Whitman would take in the poor, the destitute and the lost, often struggling artists and writers and penniless students, and give them shelter in the shop. There they would sleep, amongst the books, nuzzled by the shop's cats, eating stew and drinking tea, and all without having to pay rent. But they still had to earn their keep. George insisted that no matter what, lodgers had to work shifts in the shop, write a one-page autobiography for him to keep, and read a book every day. If they complied, they would have themselves a reading and writing nook in the most magical of literary locations. And really, who wouldn't love that? As George himself wrote in a letter to his sister Mary 2 months after opening the shop, "In the morning, I wake up with the sun in my face, and a vision of chimney pots floating above the treetops in the garden of Saint-Julien-le-Pauvre. At night, I look out the window at the illuminated spires of Notre Dame. This is the bookstore I have always dreamed of. A bibliophile's heaven. A socialist utopia masquerading as a bookstore, as George himself famously described it. A haven that George never seemed to gatekeep. His philosophy was really beautiful. He believed in sharing his home, his food, and his life with others. His ethos was, give what you can, take what you need, and this seemed to bleed into his whole enterprise. He said of his shop, in the year 1600, this building was a monastery, La Maison de Moustier. In the Middle Ages, each monastery had a monk called the Frère Lampier, whose duty it was to light the lamps at nightfall. I'm the Frère Lampier here now. It's the modest role I play." I love this, choosing to carry on the sentiment of a centuries-old tradition of providing a light in the darkness. He's not running his shop to squeeze as much money as possible from his customers, he's doing it to help them. This is a shop that's founded on the principles of generosity, trust and learning, and that's probably why it attracted so many people, from the tumbleweeds earning their keep and passing through, to writers of all kinds, some of whom were or would become canonical literary masters, from Allen Ginsberg to Anaya Nin to James Baldwin, the list goes on and on. This book is replete with the testimonies of people who spent time in this shop. Kathleen Spivak, for instance, recalled her time as a tumbleweed in the 1960s. George gave us space to live and to write. He cooked us pancake breakfasts, let us read his precious books, quizzed us on them, and in every way nurtured us strays. On Sunday afternoons, he served tea. Afterward, he'd dry the chipped dishes with pieces of torn newspaper, which later he'd uncrumple to use as toilet paper. Guests had to crawl over a pitted bathtub to get to the so-called toilet, and then the door didn't close. It was really exotic. The tumbleweeds were writers in George's exalted view, and we tried to live the part for him as well as for ourselves. One condition of staying in the bookshop was to help out in the store. It was chock full of books, crammed together, filled with treasures. George worked hard, though he had a rather random way of keeping track of things, whether it was shelving titles or doing the accounting. He hid sums of money in books, and then, of course, forgot where he put them. Customers were quite astonished when they walked out with some old 2p book, opened it and found, surprise, a bundle. This is fairly typical of the accounts of tumbleweeds collected in this book. Food, shelter and learning, delivered in a chaotic yet nurturing manner in a place that was completely ramshackled, but that also felt very much like home. These testimonies, and this book in general, is reassuring because it tells the story of a place that has made countless people feel welcome. It's a testimony to what can be achieved when people are generous and kind, when greed isn't the driving force behind their actions. That so many people truly love this place, return to it time and time again, this rag and bone shop of the heart, holds a torch to what can be achieved when caring for each other is the driving ethos. The story of Shakespeare and Company renews my zest for life, and boy oh boy, so does my third and final item on the roster, my last literary pick of the day, one that keen-eyed Books and Cats viewers may notice I've touched on before. I just can't keep away. And why would I, when the writing's this damn good? I am talking, of course, about the inimitable Zora Neale Hurston and her 1942 autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road. I referred to this brilliant book in our video on Hurston's incredible novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, which you can learn more about here. But it really needs its own impassioned shout-out because it's the most wonderful, intensely vibrant, full-of-life account I've ever had the pleasure of reading. There's such joy and optimism and power in these pages. There's also horror, violence, and abuse. So yes, not a comforting beach read, but my God, is it an empowering read, and I can tell you exactly why. This is the writing of someone utterly self-possessed, confident, and sure of herself. And the power that comes with that sheer self-awareness is astounding. Now, make no mistake, a lot of the material here makes for challenging reading. A fair amount of what Hurston says or believes I don't necessarily personally agree with, but that's part of the beauty of it, the humanity of it all. Ultimately, though, I find it reassuring because, against all odds, in a time and place where you would probably imagine her to be docile, quiet, and undefined, Hurston is, without fail, sharply and unwaveringly herself. Take this section, where she's reflecting on her childhood and her relationship with her parents. He was always threatening to break my spirit or kill me in the attempt. My mother was always standing between us. She conceded that I was impudent and given to talking back, but she didn't want to squinch my spirit too much, for fear that I would turn out to be a mealy-mouthed rag doll by the time I got grown. Papa always flew hot when Mama said that. I do not know whether he feared for my future, with the tendency I had to stand and give battle, or that he felt a personal reference in Mama's observation. He predicted dire things for me. The white folks were not going to stand for it. I was going to be hung before I got grown. Somebody was going to blow me down for my sassy tongue. Mama was going to suck sorrow for not beating my temper out of me before it was too late. Posses with ropes and guns were going to drag me out sooner or later on account of that stiff neck I toted. I was going to tote a hungry belly by reason of my forward ways. My older sister was meek and mild. She would always get along. Why couldn't I be like her? Hurston explores the dynamic between herself, her mother and her father at length, and with what feels like incredible insight. She seems to understand why her parents and her siblings were the way they were, and yet this doesn't change her understanding of why she is the way she is. It's like she physically can't be anything other than herself, and this very much carries on into adulthood. Chapter 14, close to the autobiography's end, is titled Love, and it documents Hurston's extremely passionate, turbulent, and violent romantic relationship with a man she refers to as AWP. For starters here, her prose is absolutely magnetic. Just look at the way she writes about the way she falls in love. I have read many books where the heroine was in love for a long time without knowing it. I have talked with people, and they have told me the same thing. So maybe that is the way it ought to be. That is not the way it is with me at all. When I fall in, I can feel the bump. That is a fact, and I would not try to fool you. Love may be a sleepy, creeping thing with some others, but it is a mighty, wakening thing with me. I feel the jar, and I know it from my head on down. This way of being, of falling in love is at odds with what is often expected of women in the early 20th century. There's no shyness here, there's nothing demure or careful or considered. She's not swooning and helpless, she's experiencing, as she puts it, a mighty awakening. She knows it when she's in love. There are no doubts here. And it tracks, doesn't it, that a woman so sure of herself would be so sure of love, and so sure of what she wants from a relationship. The rest of the chapter is a tough read, and if you do pick up a copy, please know that it contains a candid recollection of domestic abuse. We see Hurston accepting the abuse she suffers because, as she suggests, she's too in love not to. After a violent encounter with her lover, we sat down on the floor and each one of us tried to take all the blame. He went out and bought some pie, and I made a pot of hot chocolate, and we were more affectionate than ever. The next day, he made me a bookcase that I needed, and you couldn't get a pin between us. The emotion behind these sentences, the conflict, the passion, the red flags, the incredible closeness. The way this act of reconciliation is presented is really interesting to me. First of all, I love the lyricism of the prose. It's very beautiful. The whole passage really is difficult because it shows up the common and often cyclical abuse dynamic where the abuser attacks and then apologises only to repeat this again and again, violence followed by unparalleled closeness over and over. Hurston shows us the extreme, impassioned, explosive and violent nature of their relationship. She comes across as unhealthily obsessed and dangerously invested in a lot of ways. And yet, what comes through in this chapter is that despite all of this, she remains, above all else, committed to herself, even when she doesn't want to be. He begged me to give up my career, marry him, and live outside of New York City. I really wanted to do anything he wanted me to do, but that one thing I could not do. It was not just my contract with my publishers, it was that I had things clawing inside of me that must be said. I could not see that my work should make any difference in marriage. He was all and everything else to me but that. One did not conflict with the other in my mind, but it was different with him. He felt that he did not matter to me enough. He was the master kind. All or nothing for him. Imagine the social pressure Hurston was under as a young woman living at this time to marry, to settle, to live to serve a man. Imagine not only being expected to do those things, but actually wanting to do them, being so in love, obsessed and devoted that you wish you could just give up everything else and submit. And in the face of all that pressure and desire, still not submitting. Hurston's peerless self-possession is so well exemplified here. To write in order to release the things clawing inside her that must be said. That's her destiny. She knows it, and she knows herself so well that she can't do anything but surrender to it, to who she is, and who she will become. Hurston's commitment to herself, to life, and to justice is a beautiful thing to read. Her fearlessness in imagining a world and a way of being that's at odds with the norm is inspiring, and her embracing of all that life has to throw at her makes me feel resilient and optimistic. Hurston concludes her autobiography. Well, that is the way things stand up to now. I can look back and see sharp shadows, highlights, and smudgy in-betweens. I have been in sorrow's kitchen and licked out all the pots. Then I have stood on the peaky mountain rapping in rainbows with a harp and a sword in my hands. When I get old, and my joints and bones tell me about it, I can sit around and write for myself, if for nobody else, and read slowly and carefully the mysticism of the East, and reread Spinoza with love and care. All the while, my days can be a succession of coffee cups. Then, when the sleeplessness of old age attacks me, I can have a liquor bottle snug in my pantry and sip away and sleep. Get mellow and think kindly of the world. I think I can be like that because I have known the joy and pain of deep friendship. I have served and been served. I have made some good enemies for which I am not a bit sorry. I have loved unselfishly, and I have fondled hatred with the red-hot tongs of hell. That's living. What a woman! What a life! What affecting prose, and what a unique outlook. This book is, among other things, a paean to vitality, vibrancy, and self-worth. Like these two, it's not a cosy beach read. It's not quote-unquote comforting, and it's not easy. But what these books have in common, for me at least, is their ability to make me see things differently, to inspire resilience, thoughtfulness, and an appreciation of the good things in life. To encourage me to be of service to others and to the world around me and to myself. At the bottom line, and in very different ways, reading these books makes real the possibility of better. But these are just my recommendations and my interpretations of what reassuring even means. In the description, I've also put a list of reassuring literature recommended to me by the lovely members of the Books and Cats Discord server that you can explore as well. Honestly, that community is the best thing to come out of Books and Cats. It's such a joy to talk books with such an interesting and lovely bunch of people, so thank you, Discord members, and thanks for your recommendations. So, to conclude, in the face of all the repulsive and evil things we experience, directly and indirectly, do what you can, and so will I. Keep reading if you can, and so will I. Read outside your comfort zone when you can, and please donate to our chosen charities if you can. And if you like this kind of video from us and want to learn more about the fascinating psychology behind the practice of reading, watch our video on how you are reading wrong by clicking here next. Oh, bless you. I got her snot on my hand.